Now, we continue with the second part of our batch review for our long test number 1, and we will be talking about the overview of photosynthesis and also the light-independent reaction. Now, starting with that, we must be able to really memorize, be familiar with the equation of photosynthesis. So with that, what would be the important parts of this? So please do remember that you have to memorize the balance equation. So what will be the first reactant over here? It is 6 carbon dioxide, and over here is 6 water, and the product would be C6H12O6 or sugar, and the other product would be 6 oxygen. Now don't forget, of course, photosynthesis. In order to proceed, you need light energy and also chlorophyll. So this would be the important equation for photosynthesis, and you'll not only be needing that for Bio 2, but you'll also be needing that for your higher biology, especially as you go to your college. Okay, now what is the definition of photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is the process that converts solar energy into chemical energy. So you're familiar that solar energy would be made up of photons, while the chemical energy here after photosynthesis would be the glucose or the C6H12O6. Now, we also proceeded talking about the difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs. So the plants will be included with the autotroph. This is where the process of photosynthesis will be happening. For autotrophs can make their own food as compared to heterotrophs who cannot make their own food, which means they have to obtain or get their energy by eating outside sources, other organisms to supply their energy need. So example of autotrophs would be plants, some protists, some bacteria, while heterotroph will include animals, fungi, and some bacteria as well. Now, another key point is that the photosynthesis will be occurring, as mentioned a while ago, in plants, algae, certain other unicellular or eukaryotes, and also some prokaryotes. So this will include the plants, the cyanobacteria, the multicellular alga, brown algae, red algae, purple sulfur bacteria, and also unicellular eukaryotes like Euglena, which is color green. Now, of course, since we already know photosynthesis, it happens inside of plants and other autotrophic organisms, the organelle where photosynthesis will happen is, of course, the chloroplast. Now, you have to memorize, of course, the different parts of the chloroplast, and let's start off with this one. This is called, as you recall, the outer membrane. How about this fluid, the space that is fluid filled? You call that as the stroma. And how about the pancake shapes here? One particularly is called a thylakoid, and a stack of these thylakoids will be called a granum, and the connections between different grana would be lamellae, and of course this inner membrane would be the other membrane that would be making up the chloroplast. Now, of course, you have to memorize the different functions. When we talk about the stroma, this fluid-filled space, this is where the Calvin cycle will be happening. We'll explain a little bit later how hydrogen ions will be very important here. The thylakoid is where the electron transport chain and the ATP synthase will be found, which are very important for phosphorylation. As you can see, light is needed in order to phosphorylate, which means a phosphate group is added to adenosine diphosphate to produce adenosine triphosphate or ATP, and that is photophosphorylation. Granum, simply the stacks of flat membranes, and the lamellae would be connecting and separating thylakoid stacks. Now, the double membrane will be an evidence for the endosymbiotic theory, which we discussed when you were in grade 9. Now, the chloroplast, which is the site of photosynthesis in plants, let's look at some of the important details, first of which would be that the leaves would be the major location of photosynthesis. This is where most of the photosynthesis and most of the chloroplast will be found, particularly inside of cells called mesophyll, which will be making up most of the inner parts of the leaf cross-section, as you can see over here. So the mesophyll will be containing a lot of this chloroplast, and in order for carbon dioxide to enter and oxygen to go out, you need what we call a stomata, which would be 2 kidney-shaped cells that produces a hole where the carbon dioxide can go in and the oxygen can go out, as you can see over here. So you can find that in both sides of the leaf, the underside and the top side. Now, other important things we have to take note is that chlorophyll, the pigment which gives the leaves green color, resides in the thylakoid membrane. So the chlorophyll is very important in the absorption of light energy for photosynthesis to proceed. Now, please take note, one thing that is very important is that the chlorophyll is color green is because that the light energy, particularly sunlight, which is made up of the ROY-GB, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, only the green or the green wavelength, the green color would be reflected, and that is why green is the color that we see that makes up the leaves, and that can be explained by your physics. So this will be the color that is reflected, and that's why it's color green. Alright, so do remember that photosynthesis is a redox process, a redox reaction, reduction, oxidation process, wherein the carbon dioxide becomes reduced into C6H12O6. So that's why this is a reduction process. At the same time, in photosynthesis, the water is split or oxidized into oxygen because electrons are removed from the water, and it splits it up into oxygen. So that's why this is an oxidation reduction as well. In addition to that, photosynthesis is an endergonic process, which means that energy is supplied, energy needs to be input in order for photosynthesis to proceed, and the energy boost is provided by light energy. That's why light is very important for photosynthesis. So again, photosynthesis is a redox process. Now, let's look at the stages of photosynthesis, and this is an overview. Now, we have what we call as the light reactions, and the other one would be the Calvin cycle. So the light reaction is what where the photo part would be going on, or light-dependent reaction goes on, while the Calvin cycle doesn't really need the light. Okay, so please take note, in the light reaction, it happens in the thylakoids, and there are 4 important things that happen in the light reaction. Water is split, oxygen is released, NADPH is produced, and ATP is produced through photophosphorylation. So we'll be looking at that a little bit later in module 2.2. But for the Calvin cycle, the thing that is very important here is that carbon fixation would be happening, where the carbon dioxide, the carbon inside of the carbon dioxide will now be fixed into C6H12O6, or what we call as the organic molecule, which is glucose. So take note of that. Using ATP and NADPH, you will take note that the carbon dioxide will now be fixed as sugar. So looking at this one, light is the source of energy. Water is needed by the light reaction, and in order to extract electrons, so that oxygen is produced by the splitting of water into hydrogen ions and oxygen. So this is where the oxygen will be produced in the light reaction. Notice also that the light reaction produces ATP and produces NADPH. Now take note, the ATP and the NADPH will be needed by the Calvin cycle in order to produce from carbon dioxide to fix it into what we call as sugar. So technically speaking, Calvin cycle is not totally independent of the light, but rather it is somehow dependent on light, because it would make use of ATP and NADPH produced by the light reaction from light in order for Calvin cycle to proceed. So carbon dioxide is now fixed into what we call as sugar. Now, looking at the details of the light reaction, we must proceed with what we call as the photosystem. So there will be several parts of the light reaction, starting with the photosystem and then the electron transport chain, but we will start first with the photosystem. 2 important parts of the photosystem. This is what we call the violet portion is the light harvesting complex, while the blue portion in the middle would be called the reaction center. Now, what is very important about the light harvesting complex is that, as given by the name itself, it harvests light, it harvests photons. So when a photon would be hitting one of the chlorophyll, but actually it's called accessory chlorophyll, it will absorb the light energy and it will transfer that from one accessory chlorophyll to another accessory chlorophyll until it is gathered towards a very special pair of chlorophyll molecules that will be where the electron becomes excited and it will be released. So take note that the light harvesting complex wherein photons will be harvested and the light energy is transferred towards the reaction center, and the two important parts of the reaction center is the special pair of chlorophyll A molecules which releases electrons. So the light energy that has been harvested will now go into the electrons here, and then the electrons become excited and it becomes full of energy, so it leaps into a new orbital and it will be transported towards the primary electron acceptor. So this is the first step of what we call as the light reaction. Now please take note that the light reaction will be happening in this membrane called the thylakoid membrane, and this would be important portions of that. Now, in addition to that, do take note that there are two photosystems. Photosystem 2 is the first step of the light reaction, and then it will transport it towards the electron transfer chain, and then the electron transfer chain, once the energy of the electron has been dispensed, has been removed, has been donated to, and goes back to ground state, it will again be excited in another photosystem called PS1 or photosystem 1, and then it will again be, or the electron will become excited again. Do take note that the photosystem 2 is best at absorbing a wavelength of 680 nanometers, while photosystem 1 is best at absorbing wavelength at 700 nanometers. So this will be very important for us. Now let's look at the details of the other parts of the light-dependent reaction. Now, as we have mentioned a while ago, the step 1 is a photon hits a pigment and energy is passed among pigment molecules until it reaches P680, which is the special chlorophyll, and releases electrons. Step number 2, because of that, the electron becomes excited and is transferred towards the primary electron acceptor. Now, please do take note that the electron that has been released must be replaced. And how is that replaced? The P680 will take the missing electrons from H2O, from water. Since we know that electrons pairs would be producing the covalent bond between oxygen and the two hydrogen. So if you remove two of the electrons there, you will now then release hydrogen ions, two of them, and then you will release oxygen as well. So this is where the oxygen is produced via photosystem 2, and that would be because of the extraction of two electrons from water towards the P680 to replace the electrons that has been removed, so it produces oxygen and also hydrogen. So this will be the site of oxygen production. Now, step number 3 is where, as mentioned a while ago, the water is split by the enzyme, and do take note that 680 is the strongest known biological oxidizing agent, and oxygen is released by a byproduct of this particular reaction where electrons were extracted by P680 chlorophyll from water. Now, in step number 4, once the excited electron has been accepted in primary acceptor, this will be donated towards the electron transfer chain made out of several of these enzymes plus tocoinine, cytochrome complex, etc. Now, in this electron transfer chain, what is happening here is that the electron is transferred from one enzyme to another, releasing energy, and that energy is used up in order for ions, hydrogen ions, to be accumulating on one side, and this would cause the hydrogen ions to go through the ATPase, and that is how ATP is produced. So now take note, this is how ATP is produced via the light reaction, particularly through the what we call as the electron transfer chain. So we already know that the electron has already been excited because of the absorption of light. It is now transported or donated or transferred towards the electron acceptor, and is donated towards the what we call as the electron transport chain. Now please take note, as it goes through the different enzymes of the electron transport chain, this is where hydrogen ion will be coming in. The hydrogen ion, because as the electron passes through them, the energy is released, or some energy is released. The energy is used in order for hydrogen ions in one side of the membrane to be transferred towards the other side of the membrane. You will be noticing that there will be a gradient because there will be a lot more hydrogen ions on one side compared to the other side. So with the accumulation of hydrogen ions on one side, there is now a tendency via diffusion. If you take note, diffusion is the movement of particles from higher concentration towards the lower concentration. So since in this side there will be a high concentration of hydrogen, there is now the tendency for the hydrogen ions to diffuse towards the other side. But in this case, there is now no place for it to diffuse through except this particular hole, which we call as the ATP synthase. Now this is where the ATP will be produced. As the hydrogen ions find the ATP synthase, and then it will be diffusing out through it from high concentration towards the other side, which is low concentration. The hydrogen ions will go through it, and as it goes through the ATP synthase, it will provide energy for the protein to turn, and it will cause the ADP to come close to an organic or inorganic phosphate, causing a chemical reaction to happen, so that the adenosine diphosphate, only 2 phosphate present, will now become adenosine triphosphate, because a third phosphate has been chemically linked, has covalently bonded with ADP, as the hydrogen ions will be going through the what we call as the ATP synthase. So that is why if there will be a problem in the hydrogen out in this what we call as the electron transport chain, so that the hydrogen ions will not be moving from one side to the other, then the whole of the light reaction will stop, particularly because hydrogen ions will not be moving here, no gradient will be produced, no hydrogen will pass through the ATP synthase, therefore no energy will be provided to cause ADP to become ATP, and that would be a problem there. So take note, this is how ATP is produced via what we call as chemiosmosis, or what we call as photophosphorylation in this part, and this is chemiosmosis because of the importance of the gradient of hydrogen ions on one side going towards the other side through the ATP synthase. Do take note, that is very, very important. So again, diffusion of hydrogen ions across the membrane drives ATP synthesis. That's very important. Now after that, so ATP is already produced. Now particularly what will happen then is that the electron will now be, how they say that, it is now in ground state. So again, the light will be gathered this time around in photosystem 1, and then P700, the special chlorophyll where the electron has been transported or has been donated to, will now become excited again, and it will now be accepted by the primary acceptor. After that, it will be donated towards ferredoxin, which is part of the second electron transport chain, and the electrons will now be donated towards NADP+, so that NADPH will be produced. So now we see where NADPH produced. It is produced in the second electron transport chains called ferredoxin. ATP is produced in the electron transport chain, the first of which, and oxygen is produced via P680 oxidation in photosystem 2. So those are the very important parts of what we call as the light dependent reaction. Okay, so step number 8 is NADPH, and this is where it is produced. Alright, so let's have some concept check. The light reactions supply the Calvin cycle: A. Light energy, B. Carbon dioxide and ATP, C. Water, NADPH, D. ATP and NADPH. The answer is it produces or supply ATP and NADPH. Okay, which process is most directly driven by light energy? A. Creation of pH gradient by pumping protons across the thylakoid membrane. B. Reduction of NADP plus molecule. C. Transfer of energy from pigment molecules to pigment molecule. Or D. ATP. The answer, of course, is C. Transfer of energy from pigment molecule to pigment